I never thought that a forgotten cabin up on the ridge would hold the secret that would destroy the 40 years of marriage I had so fiercely defended. It was a dry, gray afternoon when I found the key. Tucked between old papers he'd hidden away like sacred relics, almost as if he feared the memories might slip away if left out in the open. The small, cold key felt heavy in my hand, as if it already knew what it was about to unlock. My fingers trembled as I held it. What if I was imagining things? What if it was just another cabin, one of the many we had dreamed about on those lazy afternoons over coffee? But no, something deep inside pushed me forward. For years, he had told me in clipped, almost irritated tones, "Never go in there. That's my place of peace." He said it the way someone might forbid opening a wound. And I, out of love, or fear of knowing too much, had obeyed. But now that his voice was gone, now that his coffin was shut, so too were the rules. A silence had broken, and with it, the door could now open. I drove up the ridge with that key in the pocket of the old jacket he once gave me. The same jacket he had used to wrap around me after a fight, whispering that I was his home. The irony. I climbed the path alone, the wind humming through the tall trees like a warning. But it was too late to turn back. The lock groaned as I turned the key, resisting like it knew better. The door creaked open. The air inside was stale, heavy with the scent of dust, damp wood, and secrets left to rot. Then I saw it. It wasn't a body. It wasn't a gun. It was something worse. A box filled with photographs, documents, letters, all neatly arranged, labeled with names and dates I had never heard of. Bank statements with unfamiliar signatures, though eerily similar to his. A deed in the name of a man I'd never known. And a photograph, the most recent, showed my husband smiling next to a younger woman and 2 children, as if caught mid-celebration. My heart stopped. My throat tightened like a noose. The weight of 40 years crushed down on me in that instant. Who had I really been married to? And what had I been in his life? A placeholder? An investment? A cover story? I didn't cry, not even a little. I sat down in the corner of the room, staring at that photo like it was a death sentence, not his, but mine. And that's when I knew. I wouldn't run. I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't become the unhinged widow chasing ghosts. No, I would do what I'd always done best, watch in silence. Listen, take notes. And when the time came, I would make sure even the echoes in that cabin remembered that I, too, knew how to play the quiet game. I sat on the dusty floor of the cabin, knees pulled to my chest, surrounded by ghosts in paper form. My heart thudded like a drum against my ribs, each beat reminding me that I was still alive, painfully alive. Was our entire 40 years a lie? The box of letters sat unopened beside me. I couldn't bring myself to read them just yet. Some were sealed, others dog-eared, all filled with the handwriting I knew better than my own. His script, always neat, always deliberate, stared back at me like an accusation. I reached for one, then pulled my hand back. The wind outside howled through the trees, making the wood panels creak and moan like the place itself was mourning. For a moment, I swear I heard his voice, that calm, disarming tone he used when he wanted to convince me of something. Don't overthink, Carino. Some things are better left alone. I used to believe that. I used to believe him. The sun began to dip behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the floorboards. I stood up, still trembling, and placed the documents back into the box, carefully, like bones of a long-dead truth. I locked the cabin and slid the key back into my pocket. The drive home felt surreal. The landscape passed by in a blur, like it had all become scenery in someone else's life. I gripped the wheel tightly. Every mile I drove, another question took root in my mind. Had he always been this man? Was I too blind, or too trusting? At home, I placed the box in my closet, behind a stack of winter sweaters, as if burying it could somehow delay what it meant. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't want to see my own reflection in the hallway mirror. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly overhead, as if it could stir clarity out of the fog inside me. I remembered our anniversary dinners. His quiet kindness, the way he looked at me across the table. Was that love, or guilt? Suddenly, small things I had ignored now screamed at me. The weekend trips, for solitude. The late-night calls that he said were from old clients. The way he changed passwords on the computer after he retired. I'd called it privacy. I'd called it respect. But now I called it what it was. distance. And I had let him build it, brick by brick, while I smiled and told myself I was lucky. In the early hours, I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where we once shared morning coffee. I traced the wood grain with my finger, as if it could ground me. And I made a silent vow, I would uncover every truth, no matter how deep it was buried. I would not go to my grave with questions on my tongue. Because now, I had nothing left to protect. Except myself. It started with something small. Weeks before I found the key, I walked into our kitchen one afternoon and caught him looking at a letter he quickly stuffed into his jacket pocket. When I asked about it, he smiled too quickly and said, "Just junk mail." Then he changed the subject, something about the weather or dinner, I can't even remember. But I do remember the feeling. That sharp flicker in my chest, like a warning. I brushed it off. After all, we were old, we'd built a life. I told myself that secrets like that were normal. Everyone has private things, right? Only now, I see it for what it was, a signal. A flare he lit and I chose not to follow. In the last few years of his life, he had grown more distant. Not cold, but disconnected. He began taking solo trips to clear his head. Said the city noise wore him down. I believed him. He had always been quiet, a thinker, a man who loved the quiet hum of nature more than the buzz of people. So I didn't ask too many questions. Now I wonder, who was he clearing his head with? He stopped asking me to join him on outings, no more weekend drives, no more book fairs, no more coffee at the little shop downtown where they knew our names. I missed those things, but I told myself it was just age. That he needed more space. God, I was so good at making excuses for him. He'd leave the house with a duffel bag and return with barely a story. Sometimes, he'd bring me pastries or flowers, just enough sweetness to distract me from the absence. I took those tokens like a starving woman, convincing myself they were proof of love. But they were breadcrumbs, that's all. When I sat in the cabin and saw the photo of him, of them, the pain wasn't just from betrayal. It was from the realization that I had let it happen. I had given him the benefit of the doubt. Again and again, and again. And now I see what he was really doing during those quiet weekends. Building a second life. I wonder if he laughed with her the way he used to laugh with me. If he held her hand while I was home alone, thinking he was at the lake. If those children in the photo called him, Daddy. And if he smiled more with them than he ever did with me. The part that hurts the most? I didn't see it. I didn't want to see it. I was too proud of the life we'd built. Too afraid to dig into anything that might collapse the structure. I kept telling myself that love was about trust. But I was trusting a man who wore two faces, and neither of them belonged to me anymore. I went back to the cabin the next morning. I hadn't planned to. I told myself I'd stay away until I had the strength. But something in me itched. A feeling I couldn't shake. Like I'd missed something important. And I had. In the far corner of the cabin, tucked beneath a loose floorboard in what looked like a forgotten reading nook, I found a small, weathered envelope with my name on it. Just my name. No, to my dear wife, no date. Just, Maria. The handwriting was his. I held it for a long moment, afraid to open it. I don't know what I feared more, the truth or some final lie. But I tore it open, slowly, carefully, like opening a wound. It wasn't long. A single page, written in that deliberate, slanted script of his. If you found this, it means you already know part of it. I never planned to keep it from you forever. Not really. I just couldn't find the right time. I told myself I was protecting you. That you wouldn't understand. Maybe I was wrong. You always were smarter than I gave you credit for. Follow the pieces. You deserve to know everything. Start with the journal. You'll find it where I kept my tools. J. No apology. No confessions of love. Just a quiet acknowledgement. And a breadcrumb. I sat on the edge of that narrow bench in the nook, reading the letter over and over again, as if the words might rearrange themselves and give me what I truly wanted. A reason. A real one. But maybe this was all he had to offer. His coward's version of closure. And yet, a spark lit inside me. Maybe he hadn't meant to hurt me. Maybe, in his twisted, secretive way, he was trying to tell me something. Maybe there was a truth buried beneath the deception that could still give me peace, or at least, clarity. I stood and searched the cabin again. This time, more methodically. I opened every drawer, pulled back dusty curtains, even crawled into the storage room out back, where old paint cans and rusted gardening tools lined the shelves. And there it was, a small leather-bound journal, worn at the edges, buried beneath a tarp and an old coat. I opened it and saw the first entry, dated almost 20 years ago. Just 4 words. She smiled again today. I didn't know who she was. But it wasn't me. Still, I kept reading. Because now, I had a new reason. This wasn't just about grief or betrayal anymore. It was about answers. And for the first time since his death, I felt like I had a purpose again. He left me a trail, and by God, I was going to follow it. The journal didn't give me all the answers at once. No grand revelations, no dramatic confessions. Just fragments, moments, observations written in the quiet voice of a man I thought I knew. She liked the yellow ones best. Don't forget the 3rd of May. She said I make her feel seen. None of those lines were about me. And each one chipped away at the illusion I had clung to for decades. But instead of breaking me, they sharpened me. I stopped crying. I stopped asking why. I started documenting. I became a detective in my own life. Back at the cabin, I brought a scanner and began making digital copies of every photo, letter, and document. I wore gloves, not for preservation, but for distance. It helped me pretend this wasn't personal. That I was studying the life of a stranger, not the man I had once called my husband. One photo stopped me cold. It was taken in the cabin's back porch, probably 5 or 6 years ago. He was seated at the edge of a wooden bench, a little girl climbing onto his lap, giggling. The woman, whoever she was, stood nearby, mid-laugh, holding a paper cup. It was candid, intimate, and completely foreign to me. I flipped the photo over. In his handwriting, he had written one word, family. My chest ached, but I didn't cry. Instead, I opened a spreadsheet on my old laptop and began entering names. Dates. Locations. I created a timeline. I matched the journal entries to credit card transactions and gas receipts I found in the cabin's drawers. I cross-referenced addresses on envelopes. Slowly, a pattern emerged. One name came up again and again. Lucia Rivera. It was scribbled on a birthday card from 2017. It appeared in an online order confirmation for children's toys. It was even listed as an emergency contact on a medical form I found in a manila folder. Lucia Rivera. Who was she? Not a name I ever heard in our home. Not a friend. Not a relative. Not even a ghost of a memory. I leaned back in the creaky chair on the porch, the air thick with pine and autumn dust, and stared into the woods. It was beautiful here, painfully so. The kind of place you go when you want to build something separate from the rest of your life. A second chance. A secret. He didn't just love someone else. He built a world with her. And he thought I'd never find it. But he underestimated the woman he married. I wasn't some frail widow drifting through grief. I had kept a home running for 4 decades. Paid bills, fixed things, survived losses and disappointments that would have crushed someone weaker. Now, I was going to survive this too. I packed up the documents, sealed them into folders labeled with red stickers, one for each year I could track. And before I left the cabin that day, I made one final note in my own journal. He had his secrets. Now I have mine. I couldn't carry this alone anymore. There's a kind of shame that settles on you when you discover you've been fooled. It's irrational, I know. He was the one who lied, not me. But still, it clung to me like a second skin, the fear that maybe I had been too naive, too desperate to believe in a story that was never real. So I drove to Sarah's house. She's been my closest friend for nearly 30 years. A retired teacher, always with a warm throw blanket draped across her couch, a pot of tea ready within 5 minutes of your arrival, and that calm, direct voice that has talked me off more emotional ledges than I can count. She took one look at my face and said, "Sit. I'll get the good mugs." I didn't speak right away. I just sat there, in her cozy living room filled with the scent of cinnamon and old books, and let the silence hold me for a moment. It had been days since I'd felt safe enough to breathe. When she handed me the tea, I finally said it. He had another life, Sarah. Her brow furrowed, lips parting in a silent question. I found it. In the cabin. Letters, photos, a journal. He had another woman. Kids. A bank account under a different name. She didn't gasp. She didn't start spewing outrage or platitudes. She simply reached across the coffee table and took my hand. "Oh, honey," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." I felt the tears sting, but I didn't let them fall. I was done crying for him. What I needed now was clarity and a plan. I don't even know where to start, I confessed. There's so much. I've copied everything, I've made lists, but I feel like I'm spinning in the dark. Sarah leaned back, that sharp thinking look in her eyes. You need someone objective, she said. A professional. Someone who knows how to find the rest of the pieces. She picked up her old phone book, yes, she still keeps one, and flipped through the worn pages until she found the name. Roberto Reyes, she said. Used to be a private investigator. He helped a friend of mine track down a scammer who took her brother's inheritance. Discreet, honest, old school. I took the name down. Hesitated. What if I'm just being dramatic? I asked, almost ashamed. Sarah scoffed. Dramatic is throwing a shoe through a stained glass window. You, my dear, are being methodical. You deserve the truth, not the version he left behind. That night, back at home, I sat at my kitchen table, the same spot where I once wrapped his birthday gifts and folded his laundry, and I drafted an email to Mr. Reyes using a new address I created just for this. No traceable name, no personal details. If I was going to walk through the fire, I was going to do it smart. Because now it wasn't just about heartbreak. It was about justice. I moved like a shadow through the days that followed. I didn't tell my children. I didn't confide in neighbors. I smiled at the cashier at the grocery store and made polite conversation at the post office, just like always. Because some battles are best fought in silence, and this one wasn't ready for the light. Roberto Reyes, the private investigator Sarah recommended, replied within 24 hours. We met in a quiet cafe on the edge of town, the kind of place where no one asks questions and the booths have high backs. He was in his 60s, gray at the temples, with a calm presence that reminded me of a good doctor. Someone who's seen it all and doesn't flinch. He listened without interrupting as I laid it out, the cabin, the documents, the second name, the woman, the child. I slid a folder across the table. His eyes scanned the copies, and his mouth twitched once, slightly, when he saw the photo labeled, family. Leave this with me, he said, tucking the folder neatly into his briefcase. I'll start with land records, property titles, and bank activity tied to this alias. Give me a week. I nodded. That was all I needed. Someone else watching the angles while I handled the front. That same week, I made up a story, told my daughter I was going on a personal retreat for a few days. I packed a small bag and drove back to the mountain town, but this time, I stayed in a modest little inn near the general store. I wasn't ready to face the cabin again. Instead, I played a different role. The woman in the inn's breakfast room didn't have a dead husband or a broken heart. She was just a tired widow looking for a change of scenery. I struck up conversations with locals, the chatty waitress at the diner, the handyman at the hardware store, the woman running the antique shop. I asked subtle questions. Oh, there's a little cabin up on the ridge, beautiful view. I saw it while driving. Does anyone live there? Most people said no, that it had been empty for a while. But one man, a retired park ranger named Julio, squinted and said, someone goes up there now and then. Tall man, older, drove a dark green SUV. Used to come up in the fall. Real quiet, didn't talk much. I thanked him and made mental notes. Everything lined up with the dates I'd seen in the journal. Later that night, I stood by my in-room's window, watching the wind rustle the trees, and I felt it again, that strange mix of dread and determination. He had built a life behind my back. But he had done it sloppily. Arrogantly. He assumed I'd never look too closely. He was wrong. Now I wasn't just grieving. I was tracking. And the thing about quiet women like me? We never stop once we start. The call came late, almost midnight. I was in bed, the glow of my bedside lamp casting soft shadows across the old wallpaper. I had just closed the journal for the night, convinced there would be no more surprises before morning. But when the phone rang, my stomach clenched like it already knew. It was Roberto. I found something, he said. His voice was steady, but there was a pause before he continued, the kind people make when they're about to tell you something that might break you. Your husband had a second identity. Full name, registered. I cross-checked it with the bank account tied to the cabin's utilities. Same name, same date of birth. But under that name, there are financial records. Transfers. Not just to support a family, Maria. I'm talking about movement. Money shifted across state lines. Wire transfers in and out. Someone was hiding things. I felt cold, as if the bed under me had turned to ice. I gripped the edge of the blanket, my knuckles white. How much? I whispered. Too early to tell, but enough to be suspicious. He promised to send me a summary in the morning. I thanked him, hung up, and sat frozen. This wasn't just about a secret woman anymore. This was about fraud. About betrayal with decimal points. And then, as if the universe wanted to twist the knife, came the knock. 3 hard raps at the front door. I stood up slowly, heart hammering. Who the hell knocks at midnight? I didn't turn on the porch light. I stayed behind the curtain, peeking through the slit like I used to when my son came home late in his teenage years. There was a man outside. Late 30s, maybe. Wearing a dark jacket. Holding something, a folder? He shifted on his feet, then stepped closer. Mrs. Maria Solano? He called, voice low but firm. I need to speak with you about the estate of Joaquin Solano. My husband. My hand clutched the curtain tighter. I'm not available, I said through the closed door. You can leave a card. A pause. Ma'am, it's important. I didn't respond. A few seconds later, I heard retreating footsteps. I waited a full 5 minutes before daring to unlock the door. There was no card, but the name, Solano, had been said too easily, too directly. Whoever he wasn't just knocking on random doors. He was coming for something. And I had a very real suspicion what that something was. Back inside, I locked every bolt and sat in the silence of my living room, staring at the fireplace where my husband once warmed his hands every winter. He had built an entire life out of shadows. But now the shadows were knocking at my door. And I wasn't going to answer with fear. I didn't sleep that night. The pie's call, the knock at my door, they swirled together in my mind like storm clouds. But I wasn't scared anymore. No, something stronger had taken root inside me, defiance. The next morning, I sat in my kitchen, the one he once called our little corner of peace, and opened my laptop. I pulled up the caller ID from the night before and traced the number through a reverse search service. It didn't take long. It belonged to a small legal consulting firm in the next city over. And one of their clients? The same alias my husband had used for years. I stared at the screen, my pulse slow and steady. They weren't just showing up randomly. They knew I had the documents. Maybe not all of them, maybe they didn't know just how deep I'd dug, but they knew enough to try to rattle me. They thought I'd open the door, apologize, hand everything over. They didn't know me. I made a list, a real one, not in my head. I wrote down what I had, the photos, the journal, the letters, the financial records. I also noted what I hadn't shared yet. Evidence, leverage. I could feel the shift happen inside me as I wrote. The grief was still there, like a weight in my chest, but now it was layered under something sharper. Something alive. I closed the laptop and poured myself a cup of tea, jasmine, the kind I'd saved for special mornings. I sat on my couch, sunlight pouring in through the windows, and sipped slowly, thoughtfully. I wasn't going to panic. I wasn't going to run. And I sure as hell wasn't going to answer the door for strange men with folders. Instead, I called Roberto and left a calm, firm message. Someone came to my door last night. I traced the number. You were right, they're watching. But I'm not worried. I'm prepared. Let's proceed. An hour later, I gathered the key documents and placed them in a fireproof lockbox I'd bought that morning at the hardware store. I made another set of copies and left them with Sarah, quietly, discreetly, wrapped in a plain manila envelope. No one will get to them, she promised. Not unless I'm dead. I smiled. Then I guess you better live a long time. That night, I sat by the window again. But not in fear. I was waiting. Let them come. Let them knock. Let them wonder what I knew, how much I had. Because now I had leverage. And a woman with nothing left to lose is a woman with everything to gain. I made an appointment under my maiden name. The lawyer's office hadn't changed in years. The same cracked leather chairs, the same ticking wall clock, the same heavy scent of old books and older secrets. This was the firm that had handled Joaquin's will after his death. I remembered sitting here, nodding politely, thinking everything was straightforward. I was wrong. This time, I walked in different. Straighter, quieter, but sharper. The receptionist blinked when I gave her the name. You're here to see Mr. Alvarez? Yes, I said, handing over my ID with a pleasant smile. We'll be reviewing some estate records. He greeted me with that polished charm lawyers keep in their coat pockets, professional, practiced, and just slippery enough to make you question your instincts. "Maria, how are you?" he asked as he guided me into his office. "I've had better months," I replied calmly. "But I'm here to clarify a few things." I laid a folder on the table between us. Inside, copies of the suspicious bank records, the alias accounts, and a few select pages from the journal. Just enough to make a point. His smile faltered. "Where did you get these?" "Oh, I've been organizing some of Joaquin's leftover business," I said smoothly. "Funny how much turns up when you look in the right places." He adjusted his tie. "Well, you know, some men don't finish that sentence," I interrupted. "We're not talking about infidelity, Mr. Alvarez. We're talking about potential fraud, hidden assets, possibly even illegal financial activity." He flinched just slightly. "Good. I'd like to review the original estate documents," I continued. "Full copies, no summaries, no interpretations, just the facts." He cleared his throat, then stood and walked to a filing cabinet. "I'll get them for you," he said. As he flipped through folders, I scanned the office. Certificates on the wall, photos of him shaking hands with officials. A man proud of his reputation. A man who didn't want whispers creeping under his door. He handed me the files. I flipped through them, page by page. Most of it was standard, transfers, property designations, a few legal clauses I barely understood. But there, tucked neatly in the final section, was a clause I'd never seen before. Executor reserves right to hold certain financial instruments in confidence at discretion of Party A, alias protected. Alias protected. He had hidden things right inside the will, and this man had helped him do it. I looked up and met his eyes. "How long have you known?" I didn't. "I mean, it's not uncommon to, don't," I said softly. "Because if I have to file a complaint, I won't stop with the Bar Association." He swallowed hard. I stood, gathering the copies I'd brought and leaving the originals. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Alvarez. I'll be in touch." As I walked out, I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. But I wasn't the same woman who walked in. I wasn't asking for scraps anymore. I was pulling at the whole thread. And something, or someone, was going to unravel. It was almost midnight when I opened the last album. I sat alone in my bedroom, the lights dim, the silence deep. I hadn't touched that particular box from the cabin until now. Something in me resisted it, like it held the final nail in a coffin I wasn't ready to seal. But curiosity can be cruel. It always finds its moment. The photo was halfway through the album. There they were. My husband, smiling wider than I'd seen in years, one arm around a younger woman, the other hand gently resting on the shoulder of a teenage boy. The woman leaned into him. Not in a casual way. In a claimed way. Familiar. Comfortable. Home. The caption beneath the photo was written in his careful handwriting. July, our day at the lake. Family. That word again. Family. I closed the book and stared into the dark. No tears came. That surprised me. I think I had run out of sadness. What filled the empty space wasn't grief. It was clarity. Cold, sharp, and long overdue. He had chosen to love someone else, to build with her what he once promised me. He had taken our years, our history, and shoved them into the attic of his life like old, forgotten furniture. And all while I was baking his birthday cakes, sewing buttons onto his shirts, sitting beside him at funerals, believing I was the one he'd chosen. I had begged him, not with words, but with kindness, with loyalty, to see me. I had believed our bond was unshakable, that what we built over 4 decades meant something sacred. But to him, I was the warm-up act. The understudy he kept around in case the main show was delayed. Well, the curtain had dropped now. And I wasn't bowing politely anymore. I got up from bed, walked to the attic, and pulled out a leather case where I'd kept my keepsakes, anniversary cards, old Polaroids, silly notes we'd left each other over the years. I looked at each one and asked a question I never dared to before. Was any of it real? Maybe it didn't matter anymore. Because now, the truth had set me free. And I had made a decision, the kind you make only once in your life, the kind that changes everything. I wasn't going to be erased quietly. I wasn't going to let his other life take precedence over mine. I would speak, not with anger, not with chaos. With proof, with precision, with dignity. I opened my laptop and began drafting a letter, not to family, not to friends. But to them, the ones in the photos, the family, they had benefited from my silence for long enough. It was time they heard the voice of the woman he left in the shadows. I didn't tell a soul. Not Sarah, not my daughter, not the private investigator. This part was mine alone. I sat at my dining table, the same one where I had once celebrated anniversaries, set out birthday cakes, folded holiday napkins with love. Now it was covered with folders, USB drives, manila envelopes, and a small, silent printer blinking in the dark. The air smelled like toner and something else, something electric. Like change. I created a dossier. Cold, professional, organized by year. I included bank transfers with both names, his real and his alias. Copies of letters referencing dates that aligned with the withdrawals. Photographs from the cabin, the porch, the woman, the boy. Handwritten notes from the journal that referenced gifts, medical payments, and phrases like keeping them safe. I cross-checked it all, like a surgeon double-checking before the first cut. Then, I did what most people would never expect from a woman like me. I wrote a letter. 2, actually. The first was addressed to the executor of his will, the same man who had conveniently omitted certain disclosures. In it, I listed the evidence I now possessed, cited the clauses in the estate documents, and politely demanded an immediate review of asset distribution, or else. I signed it with my full legal name, the name he never thought I'd need to wield. The second letter was for a journalist. Not a national one. No headlines, no spectacle. Just a local reporter known for her investigations into family trust violations and elder financial abuse. I included a sample of the dossier, just enough to earn her attention. Both letters were placed in stamped, sealed envelopes. I set them aside. The next morning, I scheduled a discreet meeting with a lawyer, my lawyer. A woman this time. Her handshake was firm, her eyes sharp, and the way she read through the documents told me she'd dealt with men like Joaquin before. "Do you want to go public?" she asked. "No," I said, "but I want them to know I could." That night, I returned to the cabin. Not for more evidence, I'd already drained that well. I went for something else. Closure. I sat on the back porch, the same one from the photo. I listened to the trees. The quiet. The kind of quiet that used to comfort me, but now just confirmed how alone he had left me. I brought a box of his belongings, the little tokens he kept from our life together. His old shaving brush, a photo of us from our second Christmas, a bookmark I made for him in 1989. I left them on the porch. Not as an offering, as a return, because whatever this cabin had meant to him, it no longer had power over me. Back at home, I tucked the letters into my bag. I wasn't sure which one I'd deliver first. But I knew one thing, the game he started in shadows, I would end in daylight. I chose to send the letter to the executor first. Let them feel the ground shift beneath their feet before I involved anyone else. I mailed it with tracking, no return address, from the neighboring town's post office. Quiet, clean. 3 days later, I got the call. "Mrs. Solano," the executor said. "There's been a development." I met him in his office, the same room where he had once handed me a neatly typed summary of Joaquin's estate, his voice low and neutral, like he was reading the weather. But this time, the weather had changed. "There's another claim," he said, not meeting my eyes. "A woman came forward last week. She presented a will, signed by your husband, using the alias your investigator uncovered. The documents appear legitimate." I didn't move. "She's requesting half the estate," he continued. "Not just the liquid assets. Everything." There it was. Not just a betrayal behind my back, but now a legal ambush to my face. "She came prepared," he said. "Had an attorney. Brought documentation. Even photos." My voice was calm. Too calm. She wasn't surprised, was she? He looked up, hesitated, then shook his head. "No." She acted as if this was always part of the plan. I nodded slowly, the edges of my vision going sharp and quiet. So she knew. She had known about me, about the will, about everything. And while I was digging through journals and scanning receipts, she had already been building her case. With legal help, with timing, she had waited until I was vulnerable. Until she thought I wouldn't fight. "She's claiming they were married under common law statutes," the executor added. "Based on length of cohabitation, shared finances, and the child." "The child. Do you believe her?" I asked. "I believe she believes herself," he replied. But the law doesn't run on feelings. It runs on proof. I opened my bag and handed him a flash drive. Then let's talk proof. He plugged it into his computer, and as the files opened, one after another, labeled, time-stamped, cross-referenced, I watched his face shift. What is this? He asked. Insurance, I said. Bank records. Travel logs. Real estate deeds. Some in his name. Some in hers. Some in both. And none of them disclosed to me, his legal wife. He sat back in his chair, the color draining from his face. Mrs. Solano, if even half of this holds up, it all holds up, I said. Because I had lived it. I stood, gathering my coat. Let her bring her lawyers. Let her present her version. But understand this, I have my version too. And mine comes with documents. With witnesses. With a full account of where every dollar came from and where it went. He didn't try to stop me as I walked out. Outside, the air was cold, but I didn't shiver. Let her come. Let the woman in the photos step into the light. Because while she had been preparing her story, I had been preparing the truth. I invited them all to the house. Not to be dramatic, not for a scene, but because sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is make them sit across from her, in the very home they tried to erase her from. The living room looked the same as it always had. Framed family photos on the wall. The clock ticking above the fireplace. But the air was different. Heavy, sharp. She arrived first, Lucia. The woman from the photographs. She had the kind of confidence that came from believing you've already won. She wore it like a second skin, subtle makeup, tailored coat, eyes that scanned my house like it was an Airbnb. Her attorney came with her. Of course he did. Then the executor arrived, pale and quiet, carrying his files like a man walking into a storm. I poured no coffee. I offered no chairs. They could stand. I want you to hear this, I began, holding a letter in my hand. One my husband had written years ago, hidden in the cabin. It's in his own words. I read it aloud. Some things are too heavy to carry forever. One day, someone will find this and know I was never brave enough to face the wreckage I created. Silence. Lucia shifted. Her lawyer leaned in to whisper something, but I held up my hand. No interruptions. Then I laid it all out, the financial records, the property trail, the dual identities. I read from the journal, the entries where he wrote about balancing both lives. I showed photos, receipts, birthday cards with dates that overlapped. She tried to interrupt once. He loved us, she said, voice high, defensive. I looked her dead in the eye. Then why did he lie to both of us? That shut her up. The executor cleared his throat. It's clear this situation is more complicated than previously understood. Complicated? I said, turning to him. He broke the law. He manipulated finances. He deceived his legal wife and built a second household, and you helped him cover it. His mouth opened, then closed. I turned back to Lucia. You may have shared his bed. But I buried him. I paid the hospital bills. I stood next to his coffin while you were tucked away in your secret cabin. You think that earns you half? Half of my life? She didn't answer, so I stepped closer. Calm, steady, fierce. You can lie to yourself. You can keep telling your son that his father was a good man. I won't stop you, but you won't rewrite my story to make room for yours. I laid the final folder on the coffee table. In here are notarized statements, signed and sealed, proving your knowledge of my existence and your conscious decision to continue this deception. I suggest you and your attorney read it carefully before proceeding. They didn't say goodbye when they left. They just gathered their things and walked out, slower than they came in. And as the door clicked shut, I felt it for the first time in months, stillness. Not peace, not yet, but power. I asked for one final meeting, this time at the law office, with neutral witnesses. Lucia arrived with her attorney, dressed in mourning gray. She thought it made her look dignified. I knew better. I came alone. The executor sat across the polished table, stiff with tension. Beside him, a clerk with a laptop, there to record the discussion. No more whispered agreements. No more hidden terms. I placed my binder on the table and opened it. These, I said, are the documents proving dual financial arrangements under two identities, including transfers to accounts in both your name, I nodded at Lucia, and your son's. Her lawyer tried to object. Those accounts are in a dead man's name, I said firmly. And last I checked, hiding marital assets is fraud. Then came the letters, handwritten by Joaquin, addressed to her, but stored in the cabin. I read one aloud. I can't keep the lies straight anymore. Maria deserves the truth, but I don't know how to give it without losing everything. Lucia flinched. I turned to the executor. You accepted this while knowing it conflicted with a standing, legal marriage. You withheld information about secondary assets. And you never informed me of other claimants. That makes you complicit. His hands trembled. Mrs. Solano, he said, if we can reach a settlement. I laughed softly. I didn't come here for a settlement. They all looked confused, but I saw it clearly now. I came to end it. I pulled out a signed, dated document, one that predated the second will. A contract between Joaquin and a financial advisor, declaring full ownership of all shared marital property under his legal name, no aliases. It's older than her will, I said, tapping it. And in legal terms, older usually wins. Lucia's face cracked. The calm, collected exterior started to crumble. Joaquin told me he'd fixed this, she muttered. Oh, he fixed it, all right, I said. For me. I closed the binder. This is how it's going to go. You will retract your claim for half the estate. You may request a small, documented provision for your son, if he is, in fact, Joaquin's child, which I am now challenging. I will not pursue legal action for asset concealment, provided you walk away quietly. Lucia's lawyer leaned toward her. You should take the deal. I stood. I spent 40 years building a life with a man who, in the end, didn't even leave me the dignity of the truth. I won't let him take my name, my home, or my future, too. No one spoke as I left the room. No one dared. Outside, the wind was cool. Clean. And for the first time since the funeral, I walked like someone who had just put a ghost to rest. News travels fast in a small town. No headlines. No front-page scandal. But whispers? Those spread like wildfire, through grocery aisles, church pews, and bridge tables. They didn't say my name out loud, of course. But everyone knew. Did you hear about Joaquin Solano? Turns out he had 2 lives. His wife? The real wife? She's not letting it slide. I didn't need to correct anyone. I let the silence speak for me. The legal process moved quickly once the confrontation ended. Her claim, withdrawn. The executor, reprimanded, quietly but thoroughly. I received a formal letter acknowledging mishandling and promising corrective action. Most importantly, the estate was reaffirmed. My name, my rights, my home. Still, victory never feels like it does in movies. There was no celebration, no champagne. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing I'd survived. Lucia? She disappeared from town, sold the car, shut down her social media. Her lawyer negotiated a small educational trust for the boy if paternity was proven. I allowed it, not for her, for the child. He didn't choose this. The day the final paperwork came through, I sat on my back porch, the real one, not the cabin's illusion. I held the official court letter in my hands, and I felt not joy. Not relief. Something better. Dignity. I had walked through fire. I had opened wounds most women would have buried. I had looked deception in the eye and said, not this time. I thought back to that night I found the key, how my hand had trembled, how fear had wrapped itself around my ribs like a vine. If I could whisper to that version of me now, I'd tell her, keep going. You're not crazy, you're not weak, and you are absolutely not alone. A few days later, Roberto, the private investigator, called. You did it, he said. Most women don't get this far. I smiled. I didn't get far. I just finally stood still and made them come to me. He laughed. After we hung up, I went to the drawer where I'd kept all the files. I didn't burn them. I didn't throw them away. I placed them in a box, sealed it, and labeled it simply, Truth. Because maybe one day, someone will need it. Maybe my daughter will want to understand who her father really was. Maybe that boy, Joaquin's other child, will come looking for answers. And I'll be ready. I won't sugarcoat. I won't lie to protect the dead. But I won't speak with bitterness either. Because the greatest revenge isn't shouting. It's surviving. It took me months to go back to the cabin. Even after the court settled things, even after the other woman vanished like fog in the sun, I couldn't bring myself to open that creaking door again. Not until I knew I could walk in as the owner, not the widow left behind. I waited for spring. When the trees were budding again and the snow had melted off the roof, I drove up the winding road one last time. No suitcase, no notebooks, no folders, just the key. It fit easily in the lock now. My hand didn't tremble when I turned it. Inside, it was just as I had left it, quiet, musty, full of dust and ghosts. But they didn't scare me anymore. I walked through the rooms slowly, like I was reclaiming something piece by piece. Here was where I found the journal. Here was the reading nook where he hid the first letter. Here was the porch where I saw the photo of him laughing with a woman who wasn't me. I stopped at each place, not to hurt myself, but to own it. These weren't scenes of betrayal anymore. They were markers, evidence, proof that I had survived the kind of heartbreak most people never imagine. I opened every window, let the air in, let the old smells out. I wiped down the kitchen counters, swept the floor, lit a candle, cinnamon and pine. And when the sun began to rise the next morning, I made tea and sat on the porch, wrapped in a quilt I'd brought from home. The same porch, the same mountains, but not the same woman. I wasn't the wife holding onto illusions anymore. I wasn't the detective chasing ghosts. I wasn't the angry woman in the lawyer's office or the grieving one in the back seat of a funeral car. I was just me. A woman who had lost almost everything, and then claimed it back with her own 2 hands. I stayed there for 3 nights. Alone. No visitors. No calls. I didn't read the journal again. I didn't touch the photo albums. I just existed, breathed, cooked, listened to the birds in the morning, and let my body settle into stillness. On the last morning, I wrote a letter. To myself. I folded it, sealed it, and tucked it behind the old mirror in the hallway, the same one I had once avoided looking into. The letter wasn't long, just a reminder, in my own handwriting: you lived. You lost. And you did not break. Never forget who you are. Then I locked the door, tucked the key into my pocket, and drove home. Not because I was running from anything, but because I finally understood that cabin didn't hold answers anymore. I did. I rearranged furniture, took down the old photos. Not to erase him, but to make space for me. For the woman I had become. I joined a book club. Not the kind that gossips over wine, one that read thick novels and asked hard questions. The kind of club where I didn't have to be Mrs. Solano. Just Maria. Neighbors started treating me differently, too. A little more carefully. Not out of pity, but respect. That strange kind of hush people carry around someone who's seen the truth and didn't flinch. Some even asked, gently, if I was okay. And I always answered the same way: I'm not just okay. I'm aware. Because now, I see things clearly. The subtle lies people tell. The stories we build to protect our comfort. The quiet ways we betray ourselves just to keep a little peace. I'm not interested in peace if it costs me myself. One afternoon, I found myself holding the ceramic mug he used every morning, the one with the chipped handle and faded fishing boat design. I stared at it a long time. Then I set it down. Didn't throw it. Didn't smash it. Just let it be. That was enough. I started journaling again, not about him, but about me. My dreams. My regrets. The things I still wanted, even now, especially now. It felt strange at first, daring to want something after such a betrayal. But betrayal doesn't cancel life. It just clears the fog. Sometimes, I light a candle for the years we did have, the good ones, before the secrets. I honor them, but I don't lie to myself anymore. Love can be real, even inside a lie. But truth is what endures. And now, truth is all I keep. I don't know. Some things aren't about forgiveness. Some things are about recognition, standing in front of the damage and saying, yes. This happened, and I'm still here. I don't need to forgive a man who never asked for it. But I did forgive myself, for believing, for loving, for not seeing. That was the hardest part. Now, when I pass by the mirror in the hallway, I don't look away. I meet my own gaze. I nod to the woman staring back at me, older, yes. But sharper, quieter, more dangerous in the ways that count. And I say, aloud sometimes, just to hear it, you did good. You didn't fold. Because surviving betrayal isn't about revenge. It's about wholeness. I didn't plan the gathering. It was my daughter's idea, a small Sunday lunch, just family, nothing dramatic. You've been through so much, she said, and we've all been so distant. I think we need to come together. And so they came. My son, his wife, their little boy. My daughter, with her usual too loud laugh and a homemade pie. Even Sarah brought a bottle of wine and that soft, knowing smile of hers. We sat around my dining table, the same one where I'd once laid out evidence, armed for battle. Now it held roast chicken, rice, and lemon cake. No one mentioned him, not directly, but I saw it in their eyes, the quiet respect, the gentle caution. They knew, now. Maybe not every detail, but enough. At one point, my grandson tugged at my sleeve. "Grandma," he said, "were you sad when Grandpa died?" I didn't flinch. I leaned down, touched his cheek, and said, "I was sad about the things I didn't know. But I'm not sad anymore." He nodded, satisfied, and went back to his crayons. That's the thing about children, they understand honesty better than most adults. You don't need to dress it up. Just say the truth, and let them hold it. After lunch, as the others cleared the table, my daughter stayed behind. She reached for my hand. "I wish you had told me sooner," she said, voice low. "I could have helped." I smiled. "Some things a woman has to do alone. You'll understand one day." She didn't argue. Instead, she hugged me, tightly, fiercely. Not like a daughter comforting a mother, but like a woman acknowledging another woman's strength. And that, more than anything, told me I'd done the right thing. Later, after everyone had gone and the house was quiet again, I sat with a cup of tea, watching the sun dip below the trees. And I whispered to the silence, "It's over now. For real." But I didn't say it with sadness. I said it with freedom.